Welcome to part 5 of Sew the Vernon Shirt, which is of course by Cashmerette Patterns. If you've already watched the previous episodes in this series, you will know that in part 4 we covered sewing the cuffs and sewing the button placket at the front of the shirt. Today we finish off by adding the collar and collar stand and by doing buttons and buttonholes throughout the shirt. So if you'd like to recap on part 4, I'll just pop that up in a card up there for you so you can find it easily. There is a playlist for all of the series which you'll find in my channel, and I hope you enjoy this last video of the series, and I will join you in just a moment to show you how we're starting to sew the collar and make ready to attach it to the shirt. Okay, it's time to start work on our collar, and we have two parts to the collar. We have the main upper collar and we have the collar stand, and each of those have two pieces. So we're going to be working on the upper collar first, and the first thing to do is to take the uninterfaced piece, the one without the interfacing, this piece here, and to trim off a 1/16 all the way around it. So that's about the amount. It's about, I don't know, 2 millimeters, maybe a bit less, all the way around. And what that is then going to be the under collar, and it's going to be slightly smaller than the upper collar. And then we need to pin it together. Now it's not going to quite fit because obviously one piece is smaller than the other, but we're going to ease the bottom under collar into the top collar all the way around and sew them together with short stitches on the points and at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I've pinned this together, but I'm going to be easing it into place as I sew it. So I'm going to be trying to just put a little bit of tension on the under collar and try and match it as well as I can to the upper collar. And then it won't lie flat when it's together because of the fact they're two different sizes, but when it's trimmed and turned inside out, it will make the collar, it will make the seam of the collar roll to the underneath, and then we can press it flat. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Hopefully you'll see what I'm going to be doing as I sew it. So that's going to be the upper collar, the interfaced side. That's going to be the under collar, and it's kind of loosely pinned in place. If you feel the need to baste it in place, that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go for it and sew it. Okay, there we go. Okay, we're at the sewing machine and we've got everything in place, so I need to do a back stitch to in order to secure the stitching. I'm working on this line on my stitch plate, and I'm just trying to ease the back of the under collar out to the upper collar as well as I can. I'm going to reduce my stitch length now down to 2 for the corner, and I'm going to stitch towards here and stop when I'm 1/2 inch away from the edge. Just turn this to check Right, I need another stitch. There we go. Fiddly. So I'm just trying to ease that together. And then back up to 2.5. My stitch length now for this corner. Back up to 2.5. Reverse to lock off the stitches, and there we go. Right, so we've got that sewn now. Oops, we had that all sewn now. I need to take off the taxi, which is just here. Pop that by the sewing machine, ready for the next bit. It's now time to trim the edges. I'm going to grade the seam allowances. I'm going to half the seam allowances. So David Coffin's shirt making book would have us fold the collar, fold the seam allowance in, pinch that and turn the collar the right way round, holding that point there and turning it through. And that apparently is how the professional shirt makers do it. And they do it very quickly because they have lots of practice, and they get a really professional square corner. Don't know how mine will work out. I know Diane in Stitches does it using a piece of floss, which she stitches into the corner seam and then pulls the corner out. But I haven't done that, although I could do that. So I'm seeing how the David Coffin method works. Can't remember what I did on my last one. The Cashmerette book instructions would have us grade the points of the collar so that we lose the bulk off the point. Let's see how that is looking. I'm not convinced that I've got that right. Might just press it and let's see if I can do it again. So I think it needs to be a nice square corner in order to do it. I don't know if I've cut off too much fabric to do it. Let's have a little see. Try it again. Press it. I can always cut it off and start again. I might press it down actually. Let's try that. Oh, that looks better. Having pressed it, that's worked nicely actually. Okay, so I can ease out that extra little bit of fabric now with the point. This is my point turner, just a plastic point turner. You can use anything, but you want something that's not too sharp. You don't want to go through the fabric at this stage, or that would be a disaster. So use the sides of your point turner. Well, I'm quite pleased with that. That's worked really well. Ease the fabric seam. Maybe roll it a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's quite a nice, neat corner. A bit more pressing, you might just see that a little bit better shape. Feels nice and flat, which is good. Okay, let's try the other one. So I'm going to press this one. And I press the side seam across. Whoops. So David Coffin certainly was the editor of Threads magazine, and he's written a book called Shirt Making, which I bought to make a shirt for Mr. Bobbins, which of course I haven't done yet, but there we go. It will get made at some point. And it's a traditional man's shirt. I have made him shirts, but I've used a Vogue pattern to make him shirts. I've not done, you know, a self-drafted version yet. So that's the plan. Now I've cut off a bit more seam allowance on this side. So if you, don't cut off too much seam allowance is really what I'm saying here. I think I've cut off a bit too much there. Anyway, we'll see. We'll try and just press that from here. See how that looks. Hold it in place. Just pinch it and turn it out. Not bad. Not bad. I will pop a link to Diane's blog in the information box below if you want to have a look at her technique for collars, turning out collars with the floss. It looks very interesting. I just haven't tried it yet. Okay, I think that's ready for pressing now. So the next job is to press the collar, press all of these seam allowances so that we get this seam lying nice and flat. Really useful to have some kind of either point presser or seam roller or sleeve board to get this edge flat. And to be able to get the seam to roll under. You could just roll up a tea towel. You could even put a rolling pin inside a tea towel. Anything you can use to get a point that is kind of off the ironing board. So what we want to do is press this nice and flat. And that will help us to roll this seam onto the underside of the collar. So at the moment it just wants to go flat. I don't really want that. I was just using a bit of water or a bit of spray starch to help it persuade it down. Better. It's very old, this point presser. I've had it about 30 years. It's good though. But you can do, you know, anything that's you can make some kind of ridge with. Pretty sure you can probably still buy these. I'm sure you would be able to. I have no idea how much they would be. This is an American one. June Taylor American one from 30 years ago. And I saved up money I'd made from making shirts, clothes for people, to buy better equipment for sewing. When I paid myself the princely sum of £3 an hour to make people clothes. Oh, they were the days. It wasn't a full-time job. I had a full-time job as well. It's just to make a bit of extra pocket money. And I didn't do a lot, but I did a little bit. Right, so here we go. We're trying to roll that seam now. So we want the middle bit to line up. I might pin it actually. I might just put some pins in there. If I use my magic pins, I can actually iron over them. So I can pop my pins in here, get my edges together. Pop a couple of pins in. And that'll just help me with my pressing. So I'm pinning together the opening edge where the collar stand is going to go, so that'll help me to press the other edge and get it to roll under, in theory. There we go. So that's the upper collar. I can feel it's interfaced, and we're pressing the under collar. So I'm going to do it that way up. I think that'll be a little bit easier. just see if we can get that to go now. Oh, that looks better. Yeah. So I can see now that that seam is just coming to the underneath, especially in the middle, maybe not so much on the edges. The pins are helping. So far, this side is better than the other side. So I must have done a better job of getting this one straight. So I'm going to just ease this a little bit more with my pin. Looks like it might be better. Oops. There we go. Yeah, that's better. There we go. Okay. That's much better. So that's the underneath. And now I need to just get the edges a little bit similar. I want it to at least on the side. I don't want it on the top. At least on the side. Again, I'm going to use my pins to pull it down like that. For pressing, pop a pin in there. They're great, these magic pins, you can just iron over them. It does help if you can iron over your pins and they don't melt. Glass pins are good as well. They're just a bit, sometimes they're a bit coarse for fine fabrics like these. Right, let's see if that works. Making sure I don't iron a crease in it, just using it to press the edge. Same on this side. Okay, I think that needs a bit more work on that point. It's not perfect, but pins can come out now. We can have another little look at that point and then go from there. And then the next job is to sew an eighth of an inch top stitch all the way around the outside of the collar. So that's the next job. I'm using my edge stitch foot to stitch. I've put my stitch length up to 3 for my top stitching, which I prefer. I'm going to use my edge stitch foot to stitch along the edge of my collar. Right, if you've watched the earlier versions of this sew along, you'll have seen me use my hot hemmer. What we're going to do now is turn under 1/2 inch on the long straight edge of our collar stand. I'm going to turn that up by 1/2 inch, which is about 12 millimeters metric, and I have a metric hot hemmer. It's difficult to get hold of. It's quite funny because all the quilting stuff is in inches in the UK, and all the dressmaking stuff is in millimeters. So yeah, and I was taught in both because of the age I was when I started, when I was at school. So yeah, decimalisation was just at the end of my primary education. So yeah, so I do both equally. Yeah, probably slightly. Find it easier to work in centimetres because it's in tens, isn't it? So I find that easier than working in 12s. But yeah, so it's tricky going around the corner. If you've got a flexi hot hemmer, which are available, I don't have one, then your corners will be very easy. But I'm going to kind of fudge mine. I'm going to do all the flat bits and then I'll come back to do my corners, just make them match. So that's how I'm going to get around that little tricky thing. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if it's not absolutely perfect, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. And if you want to use a bit of, if you've got quite a thick fabric, you might find that starch is your friend. This presses beautifully, usually, so I'm not going to bother with it on this particular occasion. Do the end bit and then I'll come back and do my curves. My fingers. Okay. So you can see I've got my flat bits and I've got my end bit, and what I'm just going to do now is just kind of match them up just by the way the curve lies, and that's how I'll do my curved section. I'm not going to worry. It's not exact, it really doesn't matter. That is fine. There's no pointy bits on there. It'll do. That'll be good enough. Just as long as it's a nice smooth curve, that's all that matters. And you're happy with it, give it a press, use a bit of steam. I think that is perhaps a bit shallow. I'll just pop a little bit of starch on that bit to ease it up again. Do that bit again, otherwise it'll be pointy. You are going to get a little bit of wrinkling on this because we're making our flat fabric go around a curve. So a bit of wrinkling is quite normal. And you'll see how useful a bit of starch is just to help you hold things in place where you want them to be. So what we're going to be doing next is we're going to sandwich our collar between our two collar stand pieces, which are going to be attached to our neckline. So we're going to attach first one collar stand piece to the neckline, then the collar, then the other piece. That's how that's going to go. So it's really helpful if this is pressed down like so. There we go. I'm going to stop now and come back to this fresh in the morning. Okay, so the next job is to pin the notches, to pin the collar stand to the neck. We're following the notches. I'm going to start in the centre, which goes to the centre back of the neck. The next notches go to the shoulder seam. and then to the front of the button placket. And the seam allowance comes out here, so that's the front of the button placket notch. That works nicely. Same on the other side. So one to the shoulder seam, and then to the button placket, and then just beyond the edge. Still got the excess of my button placket in place. I will just trim that off when I've got my seam sewn. So we now have the fully attached. That's better. We've now got the collar stand fully attached onto the neckline with pins. We now need to sew this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I will take you over to the sewing machine in just a moment. So we're sewing this on a regular stitch length, 1/2 inch. Okay, so the next job is to grade this seam. So I'm going to start by trimming it off halfway. I'm going to just pop my fingers underneath, being careful not to cut myself, so I can feel that I'm only cutting through one layer of fabric. I don't have any creases. And I'm cutting it back to 1/4 inch, maybe just over. There we go. Just get that straight on the end. Okay, so I'm now going to do I'm now going to cut the interfaced section back a little bit more. I'm just going to slide my scissors in theory, and I'm going to take that back a bit more. You can use a hand to help you with this. Tailor's ham, or whatever you find helpful to make it a little bit easier to get a good shape. Okay. Right, centre notch, interfaced side of the collar upwards. Okay, interface side upwards. Find the centre notch. Match our centre notches. There we go. And pin. Can always fill in with extra pins later once I'm happy that that is looking good. Yeah, that looks better. Yeah, and there's our notch on the end. Okay. Time to go to the sewing machine. Now we're going to baste this on the sewing machine with a 6mm seam allowance, because then we're going to put our other collar stand on top to sandwich our collar. So basting now, I'm going to use the same a regular stitch because I'm doing it 6mm. It won't show, it'll disappear. 6mm or 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to use my regular stitch length for this basting because it will disappear into the seam allowance. Just making sure it's secure. And then a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so we've got our collar tacked onto our collar stand there. The next job is to put the second half of the collar stand with the turned up edge over the top, and what we're going to do is pin and sew this onto just directly over the first half of the stand up of the collar stand. So we're going to pin along here. I think the hardest thing of this section is keeping everything in line and sewing it where it's supposed to be. So I did unpick 2 small sections of my collar basting just to make sure it was all straight. It doesn't really matter about the basting. The basting is going to disappear now into the seam allowance. What does matter is that you're happy that your collar and your collar stand are all where you want them to be, and all the seam lines are straight. Just do the other side, and then we know that that all matches up. This bit is relatively easy compared with the last two little bits we've done, because it's just going straight over the top of something that's the same shape, and that works quite well. We're just sandwiching the collar between the two sides of the collar stand. Pin it all in place. There we go. Might pop an extra pin there. Doesn't matter how many pins you put in as many as you like. There we go. So we've got our collar sandwiched between our upper and lower collar stands. So we're now going to sew this at 12mm or 1/2 inch along the top, a regular 1/2 inch seam around here, starting, there we go, get 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's where we're going to be sewing to. Trying to make our curve as even as possible. If you want to, you can always draw this on beforehand. Just get it as smooth as we can, following that line. Our collar stand seam allowance is 1/2 inch. Okay, it's time to grade this seam now. Now we don't actually have any interfacing in this part of the seam, so I'm going to use my pinking shears to grade it, and I'm going to just do it. I'm going to do it in half, using my pinking shears. So I'm cutting it back to roughly 1/4 inch. I'm just making sure we're only going through the fabric we want to cut. Keeping the rest away in my hand. Make sure I don't cut my fingers. Sure it's even, there are no bumps and lumps, that's fine I think. Okay, it's now time to turn the collar the right way up and give it a good press. Now the final bit with this section of collar stand, I'm going to ease some of this collar stand fold up down a little bit to cover this seam so it's completely covered, and I'm going to stick that into place with some wonder tape, and then that will hold it in place while we top stitch it. So you can see I just want that to be a little bit lower, and it stretches, it's just over that stitching line, and there it's just a bit short because of the way it's been sewn, so I'm just going to unfold it a tiny bit for there. So I'll just open that out a tiny bit. So that will completely cover that stitching line, and then that will be top stitched into place from the other side. I'm just going to do it on that side of the tape of the stitching line so that I know it's not going to show. There we go. Get a good press down, whip the top off, and then press the fabric in place. Make sure you get it in the right place first time, otherwise it's very fiddly undoing it again. There we are. Okay, so that's the first section done nicely, ready for top stitching, which we'll do from the I'm not sure which side we'll top stitch it from. So what I'm going to do now is do that for all of the rest of the collar stand. I think I'll do the other fiddly bit first, do this side first, and then just do the middle afterwards. I don't know if you can see me doing that. Fiddly fiddly. Go, peel off the protective bit, and then carefully position the fabric just from one end. To use my thing to help me do that. So we want the inside to cover those stitches. If they don't, we have to undo it a bit so that it does. It's ready for pressing. You can press over the wonder tape. It makes it more difficult to get it off, so make sure you're happy where it is before you press it. Yeah, much better. I'll give that a press. You don't have to use the tape, but I do find it does actually help, even though it can be a bit fiddly at times. It will hold it all in place much easier than pins. So that's a nice line there now. And I've done the other end, so there's just this middle bit of the back to do now. Just this little middle bit here. And I'm just going to do that in a couple more pieces. Just checking that that's deep enough, and yes it is. Okay, there we go. So that's the collar stand together. That needs stitching now into place, top stitching, and we're going to top stitch that. I'll just check whether it's from the inside or the outside. Okay, so we're top stitching from the right side of the shirt, from the outside of the shirt, 3mm from the edge all the way around. So over to the sewing machine to do that now. Right, it's time to top stitch now, and to do this I'm using my edge stitch foot, and I have my needle set on 2 to -2. I've started in the middle of the collar at the back, and I'm going to stitch all the way around. I'm on using a 3mm stitch length. I'm holding onto my thread so that I don't get a nest. Now it's quite important that you get your first buttonhole in the right position when you're doing your buttonholes. So what I've done is I've measured where my widest point is, which is level with my bust dart here, and I've marked it on. It's probably looks a tiny bit low with that actually, but it looked right on the mannequin. I might just move it up a tiny bit. I also want my buttonholes in the centre of my band, so I'm going to measure that as well. So that is my button band. It's 2.5. It's a bit more to there. So one, 2, 2.6, so on 1.3. So that is the centre of my button band. .3. So my first buttonhole is going to fall here. The next thing I'm going to use is I'm going to use my Simplex. Now a Simplex, Simplex is the manufacturer's name. This is actually a copy, it's not a real Simplex. But it's basically a lovely little tool that you can stretch out. They're not expensive and you can mark your buttonholes equally. So I need my first one to fall there. If I put the point there, I can then mark, so that's between the 1 and the 2. And then I can choose how far apart I want them. And I think that looks quite nice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm not going to do it right down to the bottom. Don't like them so close to the bottom. So that'd be 7. I could maybe do 6. But that's going to take it out of, that's going to have my top one there. And I think on the cashmerette button it has 2 at the top. Pretty sure it does. So I'm going to bring that back down again. And I think that will be a better. Certainly when you're busty, you really want enough buttonholes over that area. So you can now mark the top of your buttonhole all the way down. That one needs a different colour. So does that one. That one will be alright with this colour. I'm going to stop there. Okie dokie. So the next thing we can do is we can mark downwards from that mark. And I like to put a T at the top so that it makes it easier for me to line up my machine. So I like to have a T. Now you can do whatever shape you like, but I do suggest that you do, you know, a similar mark. I'm going to check these in a moment and make sure I've got the right one here, because check that that's the right one. I might mark it in red. I also suggest that you practice your buttonholes on something that's very similar, some similar fabric to your actual, something similar to your actual shirt, because there's nothing worse than having your buttonholes not work for you. And it's worth measuring and marking 2 or 3 times until you get it right. We want it absolutely bang on. I'm going to sew my buttonholes in dark blue, which is the best colour for disappearing on this fabric. I'm going to mark that one again in the red. That needs marking in the red. So does that one. That's not quite lined up in the right place, I don't think. It's not quite in the middle. You can see it's off when I pull the fabric away. That's better. A bit nearer the centre. check this again because I've got two slightly different ones here. I will check it 2 or 3 times. I'll check and check and check again because it's just not worth getting it wrong. This is the bit that everybody will see, and you'll see it all the time, and if you've not got it right it will annoy the pants off you. Well, it does me anyway. Like every time I do up my other shirt, it annoys me that I've got that button so low down. Every time I do it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do it again. Check it again. You probably think this is a bit OTT, but measure twice, cut once is a really good thing, and measure twice or even 3 times is also good for sewing. Now I think that some of these now are off when I get that on that one. That's the centre one I want right. It's not quite in the right position for those 3. Those 3 are all okay. This one isn't quite right. I'm ready to practice my buttonholes and start them and start sewing them on. Just double check that you've got the right side, that you're putting your buttonholes on the right side. Okay, so here we go. This is my first test buttonhole. This is my automatic buttonhole foot. It's all set, so I should be able to just sew, and it should do me a buttonhole. So it's done me a 17mm buttonhole for a 15mm button, and I'll show you the one that I've just opened up because I did one to start with just to test so that I could see what I was doing. A bit more tricky with the camera in the way. This is the first one I did now, and I've opened this one with my buttonhole chisel, which is this little tool here. It has a little block. You can get them without the block. It's a little block, and that's how I cut my buttonholes. But I always, on my actual shirt, I will do each buttonhole with fray check before I open them out on both sides, and that will just keep them a little bit neat and tidy. So you can see that's a really good fit with my button. Just slides through, no problem, but it's not going to come undone. And there we go. So 2 buttonholes. Happy with those. I can just do one more just to check, but I think that's, I'll just try. Okay, another one, and they're all, it will just keep doing that ad infinitum. They'll all be the same size. There we go. So this is the actual shirt front. I'm starting at the bottom. I'm going to work up to the top. So that's sewn that exactly like my practice ones. It's all nice and straight, where I want it to be. So there we go. So here we've got, I've turned this upside down because I think that'll give me a better finish on this one. This is an example using the clamp. Remember, if you think you're going to find this really difficult, you can always do the buttonholes before you actually sew the cuffs on. So that is another option. Okay, let's see if we can get this done then. So that I can reckon I can match that now with the slightly easier one without the clamp. Slide the clamp off. And I reckon now I can do this one on the other side and get it fairly close to the one I've already done. For example, it starts a little bit further away than my original mark. Start it there. Right, let's see what that looks like. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. Good. Okay, fray check is the next step. Small amount. I've put something underneath to stop it running on anything else. I'm going to do one side and then I'm going to do the other. A bit of an iron sets it. You don't really want it on your iron, so do use a pressing cloth. Okay. Time to open up the buttonholes. So this is my button chisel. You can use a pin and a stitch unpicker. I prefer a buttonhole chisel, and you can either do this on a little block like I'm doing, or you can do it on a cutting mat. That also works really well. It is a lot easier on a cutting mat, I think, then, because it tends to get stuck in the grain of the cutting block. That's better. So the final step is to put our buttons on. I think I'm going to hand sew my buttons on. I need to mark them in place first. Just need to make sure I have the button lined up with the buttonhole. So that needs to go there. And this one needs to go the same amount. I think I need that in red. There's my 2 buttons on that sleeve. And then this cuff. Again, line it up so that the buttonhole, the button is lined up with the buttonhole, and they're both about the same amount. You can always adjust them. If you're not quite happy with them, you can always just take them off and move them a little bit. It's perhaps a bit too far up the sleeve. There we go. Now the button band I find a little bit easier, because the button band, if you spread it out, you can just mark it through. That's what I do normally. Of course, we've got a pattern matched button placket, so we can make sure that we pattern match it. So I'm going for the middle and the end. Probably won't ever button that one up anyway. Middle. Okay, buttons. These are my buttons. They're going to look lovely. They're quite a varied button. I'm going to use as varied as possible, I think. It's got a nice bit of green in it. It'd be nice to have quite a light one there. It's got a bit more white on it, I think, on that dark background. Yeah, so they're all quite different. I think they'll look lovely. There we go. I shall get those sewn on. So the next time you'll see this is with all the buttons in place and it probably being worn. Happy sewing. Thank you for watching part 5 of Sew the Vernon Shirt. I hope it helps you in your sewing journey. If you have any comments, it would be lovely to hear from you. If you already follow and subscribe, thank you so much. And if you don't, then please consider subscribing. Do check out the rest of my channel for other videos which you might be interested in, and do let me know if you've made the Vernon shirt, if you intend to make it, or if you have any specific queries or questions regarding this sew along. Happy sewing. Bye bye.